The Myers Family, from Pass It Down, by Leonard S. Marcus. Essential question: how can people communicate through the arts? Walter Dean Myers, born August 12, 1937, Martinsburg, West Virginia. Christopher Myers, born October 17, 1974, Astoria, New York. We lived on the cusp, Walter Dean Myers says of the Jersey City home where his son, Christopher, grew up during the 1970s. On one side of our house, the neighborhood was all white. On the other side, it was predominantly black. Christopher was a mixed-race kid. Because he could read at 4, he started school early. His classmates were all 2 years older than him. He was not a good athlete, so he was pushed around a bit in school. Classmates looked at me, Christopher Myers recalls, as if I had 3 heads. Walter, the author of Bad Boy, Amistad, HarperCollins, 2001, grew up knowing a lot about not getting along well at school. Raised by foster parents in the economically depressed Harlem of the 1940s, he was a restless, inward-looking, over-tall boy with a lisp and a serious tendency to take a fist to anyone who made fun of him. His foster parents worked long hours to make ends meet. Although genuinely concerned about his welfare, they were often unaware when their son skipped entire weeks of school. Walter was lucky enough to have a few teachers who, despite his record as a troublemaker, wanted to help him. Some gave him books that made him hungry for more books. Reading, and by middle school, writing, became his life preservers. Walter Dean Myers and Christopher Myers. As a teenager, as Walter became more aware that blacks did not have the same chances as whites, his doubts about the future multiplied. It never occurred to him that he might one day write a book. Even as a first-time author, as a man in his 30s, Walter says, "I didn't think I was going to have a career. I thought that maybe I would get published occasionally." After years of earning his living as an editor, Walter became a full-time writer in 1977. He was 40, Christopher was 3. "I'm an early riser, and when Christopher was going to daycare," Walter recalls of that time, "I'd finish work in the late morning and pick him up, and we would hang out together in the afternoon, which was very cool. We talked, very often solving the world's problems. I enjoyed his company." We read together, first comics, which had been forbidden to me as a child, and Reader's Digest, because we both loved jokes. Later, we read poetry. On weekends, father and son took the train into Manhattan and headed for their Golden Triangle, their 3 favorite bookstores, including one called Forbidden Planet, from which they always returned with armloads of books. Walter, as his foster father had done with him, often told Christopher far-fetched stories that he presented as true. Christopher remembers, "I wouldn't eat Brussels sprouts for years because of a story he told me. I had asked him, 'What are they? They're so odd-looking.' He responded with a long, involved story about a war we had fought in the 60s with a race of very small aliens. Brussels sprouts were the aliens' leftover heads. I was glad to find this out because now I knew why I was never going to eat Brussels sprouts again." Analyze the text. Fact and opinion. The author argues that reading and writing became Walter Dean Myers' lifesavers. How do the facts in the selection support the author's claim? This was not the only way that Walter taught his son not to believe everything he heard or read. Pop, Christopher says, would go through my school history text and write corrections in them. When a book referred to bringing the slaves from Africa, he would cross that out, wanting to be sure I understood that African people had been enslaved. I was a good student, but I learned early on that education didn't necessarily happen in school. And I learned from Pop that books did not come down from on high, that people wrote them, and that there was work for me to do. Christopher was drawing 2 hours a day by the time he was 9. Walter takes no credit for this. His mom, who paints, must have noticed he had talent, because I didn't. Connie would put his drawings up on the refrigerator or the wall. At about 10, he won some contests, but I still wasn't paying much attention. Then he had a picture published in a children's magazine. I saw it, a drawing of an antelope or something, and said, "That's really good." Connie took Christopher to museums and comic book fairs, and once, on his birthday, on a tour of Marvel Comics. Walter, meanwhile, involved his wife and their son in every aspect of his work. Christopher remembers, "My father wrote 10 pages a day. When he was done, he would come down and have me read it out loud so that my mother and he could talk about it." As a teenager, Christopher accompanied his mother to the library to help research Walter's books. Digging up information about African American history strengthened my link to my cultural background. Christopher says, "I also realized that there were true stories worth finding, and that it was possible to unearth them." Christopher and Walter at an event celebrating the publication of Harlem, Stapleton Branch Library, Staten Island, New York Public Library, May 1998. When Walter discussed a new publishing contract with his wife, he encouraged Christopher to join in the discussion. He wanted me even at 9 and 10 to see, Christopher says, that a contract is part of the process by which books are made. What Christopher most wanted, however, was to draw the pictures for his father's books. He recalls the first time he and his father talked about this. "I was 10 and reading fantasy novels when Pop said one day, 'Let's do a fantasy together. What would you like to see in it?' 'How about a black unicorn?' I said. 'That's cool,' he said. 'What's his problem? We need to give him a problem.'" Years passed before Walter was able to answer his own question and finish Shadow of the Red Moon, Scholastic, 1995. Christopher, then a college student, illustrated the book, finally getting his wish. Analyze the text. Analyze events. What anecdotes in the selection explain the events that lead to Walter Dean Myers and Christopher collaborating on their first book? Collage self-portrait, made by Christopher, age 14. In all, Christopher illustrated 2 of his father's books while still at college, Shadow of the Red Moon and a picture book called Harlem, Scholastic, 1997. Both times, Walter suggested the idea, and both times, Walter says, the publisher was not happy about it. It gets too personal. They did not want to have to turn down my son. So Christopher did sample illustrations and had them accepted. When Harlem won a Caldecott honor, everyone began saying, "Father, son, father, son." It's been much easier since then. In 1999, Christopher launched his solo career with Black Cat, Scholastic, 1999, a haunting picture book that aptly traces the wanderings of a stray cat as he makes a place for himself in a big and not always welcoming city. The next picture book Walter wrote for Christopher to illustrate was about the blues. As in the past, Christopher showed his father the artwork for Blues Journey, Holiday House, 2003, only after he had finished it. Walter says, "I think he's still afraid of that father and son thing, the father as judge." Christopher agrees. "If we talked about it sooner, he might make some comment that would get into my head." But Christopher is not alone in his worries. Walter adds, "We're both nervous because we both want to hold up our end. We feed on the tension." Writing Blues Journey, Walter recalls, was easy for me. I am comfortable with the blues lyric form. For Christopher, however, illustrating his father's poems was anything but easy. I wanted the images to tell a parallel story, not just link one-to-one to the poems. Walter admired his son's artwork, but was puzzled by a picture with the fisherman and his net. It didn't seem to go with any of the poems, so I wrote another poem to go with the image. Years earlier, Walter says, I learned about the power of images from Christopher. My wife and I collect photographs. We have about 10,000, most of black life between 1855 and 1940. I began collecting them when I was teaching a writing workshop for middle school kids in Jersey City. Christopher, who was 13, was there too, drawing the illustrations for their yearbook. The kids were so into the images Christopher was making, I thought, let's bring in some photographs. That experience also led to Brown Angels, HarperCollins, 1993. Pencil Study by Christopher for Blues Journey. Finished art in mixed media on brown bag paper for the Fisherman poem in Blues Journey. Looking back, Walter says, I think that probably I have gained more from Christopher than he has from me. I've published more than 80 books. After a while, you repeat yourself. But with Christopher's constant push toward innovation, I feel refreshed. When Walter first saw the art for Blues Journey, he paid Christopher his version of a high compliment. If I'd known you were going to do something that good, he told his son, I would have written it better. By now, Christopher usually knows when his father is teasing. Oftentimes, he says, he'll call me. I'll pick up the phone and he'll say, why you talking on the phone? And I'll say, because you called me. Well, I'm working, he'll say. I can't talk to people like you. Then he'll hang up the phone. In that joking way of his, there's also a seriousness. The idea that he's always working, and that my life has to be about always working too. Analyze the text. Author's purpose. What words and phrases in the text let you know the author's perspective on Walter Dean Myers and his son? Blues Journey by Walter Dean Myers. Illustrated by Christopher Myers. Blues Journey. Mixed media on brown bag paper. Holiday House, 2003.